My whole life, I thought I was a burden. Every paycheck from my coffee shop shifts, every birthday card with a crumpled 20 tucked inside, it all disappeared into what my parents called family expenses. I never questioned it, but at my graduation dinner, everything changed. My grandmother, Eloan, looked at me with pride and said, "Hope the $1,500 I sent you every month helped, Ren." My heart stopped. My hands froze around my glass. "What money?" I whispered. In that moment, the truth began to unravel, and my world would never be the same. I'm Ren, 25, a college graduate from Atlanta, Georgia. For years, I believed my family was scraping by. I worked double shifts at a diner, lived on instant noodles, and felt guilty for needing new shoes or a doctor's visit. My parents, Sigrid and Torin, always said money was tight, and I was determined not to add to their stress. I thought I was helping them survive, but that night at my graduation dinner, I learned the truth. They'd stolen nearly $100,000 meant for my education, money my grandmother sent to give me a future. This is my story of uncovering their betrayal, fighting for justice, and finding my purpose. It's about the lies I lived with and the strength I found to break free. What I discovered wasn't just about money, it was about trust, family, and the cost of silence. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not alone, and neither are you. Growing up, I carried a weight I didn't understand. At 15, I skipped a school trip to Washington, D.C. because Mom said we couldn't afford it. I remember standing in our cramped kitchen, wearing sneakers with holes, apologizing for even asking. The shame stuck with me. Every time I needed something, I felt like I was taking food off our table. My parents fed that guilt, always talking about sacrifices, about how my needs strained them. I believed it. I worked harder, asked for less, and tried to be invisible. But that night at the dinner, when Eloan spoke, I saw it all differently. The pearl necklace gleaming on Mom's neck wasn't a hand-me-down. It was a luxury bought with money meant for me. Dad's new SUV parked outside wasn't a necessity. It was a lie. They built a life on my sacrifice, making me feel small while they spent what was mine. I kept replaying moments. Missed doctor visits, second-hand clothes, the birthday check Mom said bounced. Each memory cut deeper, showing me a truth I'd been too young to see. They didn't just steal my money, they stole my trust, my confidence, my sense of worth. Eloan's words cracked open that lie, and though it hurt, it set me on a path to reclaim what was mine. Not just the money, but my voice. If you've ever felt like a burden for needing what's rightfully yours, this story is for you. It's about breaking the silence and finding strength in the truth. That night, my family gathered in our modest Atlanta home to celebrate my college graduation. The dining room felt like a stage, dressed up with touches we supposedly couldn't afford. A bouquet of lilies on the table, a bright "Congratulations, graduate" banner taped to the wall. It all seemed forced, like a performance I didn't know I was part of. My mother, Sigrid, fluttered around, her pearl necklace catching the dim light of the chandelier. A relic from better days, she always said. I wondered how we paid for it, given how often she complained about bills. My father, Torin, played the gracious host, pouring wine and spinning stories about real estate deals to my uncle, his voice smooth as ever. I sat there in my graduation gown, smoothing the fabric over my knees, feeling a mix of pride and exhaustion. 4 years of late-night study sessions, double shifts at the diner, and scraping by on scholarships had led to this moment. I'd made it, despite the constant weight of being told our family was stretched thin. I glanced at my grandmother, Eloan, sitting quietly at the table's end. At 78, her eyes held a warmth that felt like home, unlike the guarded affection I got from my parents. Her presence grounded me, a reminder of the stories she'd tell me as a kid, tales of resilience, of her own mother surviving tough times. I didn't know it yet, but Eloan was about to change everything. As we raised our glasses for a toast, I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe this night would mark a new chapter. But the air was thick with something unspoken, something I couldn't name. Sigrid's smile was too tight, Torin's laugh too loud. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, This was my moment, wasn't it? I'd worked so hard to make them proud, to ease their burdens. But as Eloan stood to speak, her voice steady and kind, I had no idea the truth was about to unravel, pulling the threads of my life apart with a single sentence. Eloan stood up, her frail frame commanding the room. Her eyes locked on mine, filled with pride that made my chest ache. "Here's to my brilliant granddaughter," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Hope the $1,500 I sent you every month helped, sweetheart." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The room went silent, the clinking of glasses replaced by a deafening stillness. My hand froze around my wine glass, the cold seeping into my fingers. A knot tightened in my stomach, twisting hard. "What money?" I whispered, barely audible, my voice trembling. Eloan's smile faltered, her brow furrowing in confusion. "The $1,500 I sent for 4 years," she said, her tone sharpening. "For your expenses, so you wouldn't have to work yourself to the bone." My parents' faces told the story before their words could. Sigrid's eyes darted to Torin, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Torin's hand gripped his glass, so tightly I thought it might shatter. For years, $1,500 a month. I did the math in my head, my heart pounding. $72, 000 gone. While I was working night shifts at the diner, surviving on instant noodles, skipping doctor visits because we were too broke. I looked at Sigrid, her pearl necklace gleaming like a cruel joke. I looked at Torin, his polished shoes and tailored jacket mocking my years of sacrifice. "What money?" I repeated, louder this time, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Eloan's gaze shifted to my parents, her eyes narrowing. "Sigrid Torin," she said, her voice like steel. "What is she talking about?" They stammered, their words tripping over each other. Something about bank errors, misplaced funds, a mix-up. But their faces, pale and twitching, screamed the truth. I felt the room spin, my graduation gown suddenly heavy, like it was anchoring me to a lie. Eloan's hand reached for mine, steadying me, but the ground beneath my feet was gone. In that moment, I knew. My parents hadn't just taken my money, they'd taken my trust, my future, my sense of belonging. That pearl necklace on Sigrid's neck wasn't a family heirloom. It was a luxury, bought with money that should have been mine. Torin's new SUV, parked proudly outside, wasn't a necessity for our struggling family. It was a betrayal, polished and gleaming. Every detail of that night came into sharp focus, cutting deeper with each realization. I saw the lilies on the table, the banner, the wine, all paid for with what? My future. My years of guilt for needing basic things like clothes or a dentist appointment. I remember the time Sigrid sighed about tight budgets when I asked for school supplies, how Torin lectured me about responsibility while I worked weekends to afford textbooks. They'd built a life on my sacrifice, dressing it up as love. My mind raced back to moments I'd buried, skipping meals to save money, wearing frayed jeans to school, apologizing for being a burden. Each memory was a wound reopening, showing me a pattern I'd been too young, too trusting to see. Sigrid's voice broke the silence, high and shaky. "It's not what you think, Ren," she said, her hands twisting her napkin. "We needed it for the family." Torin nodded, his charm replaced by a tight-lipped glare. "You don't understand how hard it's been," he said. But their words felt hollow, like lines from a script they'd rehearsed. Eloan didn't buy it. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, pinned them in place. "You needed it?" she asked, her voice low, cutting. "For what?" "To make Ren feel like she owed you her life." They had no answer. The air grew heavier, the weight of their lies pressing down on us all. I looked at my uncle, my cousins, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. Did they know? Had they suspected? I felt exposed, like the family I thought I knew was a facade. Eloan stood, her chair scraping the floor. "We'll get to the bottom of this," she said, her voice a promise, not a threat. She walked out, leaving a void where her warmth had been. I stayed seated, my graduation gown clinging to me like a second skin, my hands trembling. Sigrid reached for me, but I pulled back, the touch burning. "Ren, please," she whispered, but I couldn't look at her. Torin's silence was louder than any excuse. The dinner ended in fragments, guests leaving quickly, the lilies wilting under the chandelier's light. I sat there, alone with the truth, replaying every sacrifice, every moment I'd felt small. They hadn't just stolen $72,000. They'd stolen my sense of family, my belief in their love. But Aloan's words, her steady hand, lit a spark in me. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of uncovering a truth I'd been denied, a truth I'd fight for, no matter how much it hurt. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind trapped in a loop of Aloan's words. Hope the $1,500 I sent you every month helped. The dining room silence, my parents' pale faces, their stammered excuses, it all replayed like a bad dream. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars my father, Torin, had stuck to the ceiling when I was 10. Back then, those stars felt like magic, a rare moment of his warmth. Now, they mocked me, a reminder of a trust that no longer existed. By dawn, I was on my way to Aloan's hotel, my heart heavy with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. She opened the door, her eyes tired but fierce, and led me to a small table covered with papers. "These are the bank statements," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. She slid them toward me, each page a dagger. For 4 years of college, she'd sent $1,500 every month, $72,000 total. But it didn't stop there. During high school, she'd sent $500 monthly, another $24,000, meant to ease my path to college. Nearly $96,000, all intended for me to give me a chance to focus on my studies, to breathe without the weight of financial strain. I traced the numbers with my finger, my hands trembling as the math sank in. Every dollar was gone. While I was working night shifts at the diner, skipping meals to save money, my parents had taken it all. I looked at Aloan, her face etched with regret. "I thought you knew," she said softly. "I thought they were giving it to you." Her words broke something in me, not just anger, but a deep, aching sadness. I'd spent years feeling guilty for needing anything, apologizing for school supplies, wearing secondhand clothes to avoid being a burden. And all along, my parents had a safety net for me, one they'd stolen. I remembered Sigrid's sighs, her "we're doing our best" speeches, Torin's lectures about family sacrifice. They weren't struggling, they were lying. I felt the room shrink, the walls closing in as I grappled with the scale of their betrayal. Aloan reached for my hand, her grip firm. "We'll figure this out, Ren," she said, her voice a lifeline. I nodded, but inside I was unraveling. This wasn't just about money. It was about every moment I doubted myself, every time I'd felt small. Those stars on my ceiling weren't magic anymore. They were a lie, just like the family I thought I had. But Aloan's resolve lit a spark in me. I wasn't ready to give up. I needed answers, and I was going to find them. Determined to understand how my parents had hidden $96,000, I called my bank the next morning. My hands shook as I dialed. Aloan's bank statements spread out before me like evidence in a crime scene. The teller's voice was calm, clinical, as she confirmed my worst fear. "There's a joint account under your name, opened with your mother, Sigrid, when you were 17, she said. My stomach dropped. "I never opened a joint account," I replied, my voice barely steady. "I never signed anything." The teller paused, then suggested I visit the branch with ID to review the records. I drove there in a daze, Aloan by my side, her presence the only thing keeping me grounded. At the bank, they showed me the account documents. My name was there, scrawled in a signature that wasn't mine. Sigrid's handwriting, clumsy and unmistakable. They'd forged it, opened the account in secret, and funneled every dollar Aloan sent into their control. The statements showed withdrawals, hundreds of them, some small, some massive, none of which I'd ever seen. I felt sick, picturing Sigrid depositing my birthday checks, Torin signing off on transfers while I worked late to afford textbooks. I called my cousin, Isolde, hoping for some clarity. Her voice was heavy when she answered. "They did the same to me," she said quietly. "Grandpa left me a college fund, but Sigrid and Torrin drained it. I tried to tell you years ago, but they convinced everyone I was lying." Her words hit like a punch. Isolde, my closest cousin, had been pushed out of my life, labeled a troublemaker when she was just another victim. I remembered family gatherings where she was absent, her name whispered like a warning. My parents had built a wall around me, keeping me from anyone who might expose them. I stared at the forged signature, my name twisted into a lie. It wasn't just the money they'd taken, it was my autonomy, my right to know. Eloan handed me her own records, every transfer meticulously documented. "They thought I wouldn't check," she said, her voice thick with anger. But I kept everything. Her receipts were a roadmap of their deceit, each one proof of a betrayal that stretched back years. I felt a fire growing inside me, not just anger but a need to understand why. Why had they done this? Why make me feel like a burden while pocketing my future? The bank's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mirroring the chaos in my mind. I thought of every sacrifice, missed doctor visits, patched up clothes, the guilt I carried for needing anything. They'd orchestrated it all, and I'd believe their act. But now, with Eloan's hand on my shoulder, I knew I couldn't stay silent. This was bigger than me, and I was ready to dig deeper, no matter what truths I'd uncover. The forged account was only the beginning. As I sat with Eloan's bank statements, another piece of the puzzle surfaced, one that cut deeper than the stolen money. I opened my old email account, searching for anything that might explain how I'd missed this for so long. There it was, an email from Eloan, sent when I was 16, mentioning a birthday check for $200. "Use it for something fun," she'd written. I remembered Sigrid's dismissive tone. It bounced, Ren. Banks make mistakes. I'd believed her, ashamed for hoping for something extra. Now, I realized that check hadn't bounced. It was deposited into that secret account, another drop in the $96,000 they'd taken. I kept scrolling, finding more emails Eloan had sent, updates about her life, offers to visit. Most went unanswered, not because I ignored her, but because Sigrid had access to my email. She'd reply as me, polite but distant, saying I was too busy or needed space. My parents had controlled the narrative, painting me as ungrateful to keep Eloan at arm's length. I felt a chill, realizing this wasn't just about money, it was about control. They'd isolated me, carefully crafting a world where I depended on them, where I questioned my own worth. I called Thane, my childhood friend, hoping he could fill in the gaps. His voice was hesitant when he answered. "Ren, I didn't know how to tell you," he said. "Your parents told me you were too demanding, that you didn't want me around. They said you needed to focus on family." I gripped the phone, my throat tight. Thane and I had been close, sharing secrets in our treehouse, planning our futures. But by high school, he drifted away, and I'd blamed myself, thinking I'd pushed him out. Now I saw the truth. Sigrid and Torrin had pushed him out, just like they'd pushed out Isolde. They told my friends, my cousins, anyone who might have seen through their lies, that I was the problem. I remembered family dinners where Sigrid would sigh about my selfishness, Torrin nodding along, their words planting seeds of doubt. I'd internalized it, shrinking myself to fit their narrative, working harder to prove I wasn't a burden. Every skipped school trip, every frayed jacket I wore to class was part of their design. They'd made me feel small, dependent, like my needs were a flaw. I thought of the times I'd apologized for asking for a new backpack, how Sigrid's "we'll see" was code for no, how Torrin's lectures about family first made me feel guilty for wanting anything. They'd built a cage around me, not with bars but with guilt, lies, and isolation. I looked at Eloan, her face a mix of anger and sorrow. "They kept you from me," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you didn't want to see me." The pain in her words mirrored mine. They'd stolen more than money. They'd stolen my relationships, my sense of belonging. I remembered a moment at 14, standing in our driveway, watching my cousins leave after a tense visit. Sigrid had said they were jealous of me, but now I knew she'd driven them away to hide her theft. The realization was a weight. heavy but clarifying. I wasn't the problem. They were. Their lies had kept me in the dark, but Alohan's truth was pulling me into the light. I felt a resolve building, a need to confront not just their theft, but the years of manipulation. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was for every moment I'd felt unworthy, for every connection they'd severed. I wasn't alone, and with Alohan by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. The truth about my parents' betrayal, the $96,000 they stole from me, was a wound that wouldn't close. But Alohan, my grandmother, wasn't about to let it fester. She took me to meet Mr. Halstead, her attorney of 20 years, in a small office cluttered with legal books and coffee-stained files. His sharp eyes and steady handshake told me he'd seen battles like this before. We sat down, and Alohan spread out her bank statements, each one a testament to the money she'd sent for my future. $1, $500 a month for college, $500 a month in high school, all vanished into my parents' hands. Mr. Halstead listened as I recounted the forged joint account, my name scrawled in Sigrid's handwriting, a betrayal in ink. "This is fraud," he said plainly, his voice calm but firm. "We can build a case." I nodded, but my heart raced. Suing my parents felt like severing the last thread of family I had left. Alohan squeezed my hand, her resolve anchoring me. We spent days gathering evidence, bank records, Alohan's notarized statements, and a bombshell, my cousin Isolde's testimony. She'd revealed how Sigrid and Torin had drained her college fund too, a pattern of deceit that made my stomach churn. Every document we collected was a dagger, sharp and undeniable, proving my parents had orchestrated a lie that spanned years. I thought of the nights I'd spent studying by a flickering lamp, the guilt I'd carried for needing textbooks, all while they pocketed my future. Mr. Halstead explained the legal steps. We'd file for fraud and theft, seeking restitution and damages. The words sounded cold, clinical, but they carried the weight of my pain. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for the truth. For every moment I'd felt like a burden. Alohan's eyes met mine, fierce with determination. "They don't get to take your future, Ren," she said. "Not without a fight." I clung to her words, but doubt crept in. Facing Sigrid and Torin in court meant exposing our family's cracks to the world. I remembered their voices, Sigrid's sighs about family expenses, Torin's lectures on sacrifice. They'd made me believe I was the problem, and now I'd have to stand up to them, to their lies in the courtroom. It was terrifying, like stepping into a storm with no shelter. But as we sorted through evidence, I felt a shift inside me. Each bank statement, each forged signature, was proof I wasn't crazy, wasn't ungrateful. I'd been manipulated, but I wasn't powerless. With Alohan and Mr. Halstead by my side, I began to see this fight as more than a lawsuit. It was a reclamation of my voice, my worth. The road ahead was daunting, but I was ready to face it, to demand the truth they'd buried for so long. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, all polished wood and echoing voices, but it felt like a battlefield. I stood at the plaintiff's table, my hands trembling, my graduation gown long gone, but its weight still heavy on my shoulders. Sigrid and Torin sat across the room, their faces a mask of composure, but I saw the cracks, Sigrid's nervous fidgeting, Torin's clenched jaw. Their attorney, Bennett, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips like he thought this was a game he'd already won. I wanted to scream, to demand they explain why they'd stolen $96,000 meant for my future, but I held my breath, waiting for my moment. Mr. Halstead presented our case, his voice steady as he laid out the evidence. Alohan's bank statements, the forged joint account, Isolde's testimony about her stolen fund. Each piece was a brick in the wall we were building, a wall to shield the truth from their lies. When it was my turn to speak, my knees shook, but I stood. "This isn't just about the $96,000, I said, my voice wavering but growing stronger. "It's about trust. My parents, Sigrid and Torin, took money meant for my education, my future, and made me feel like a burden for needing anything. They forged my name, lied to my grandmother, and isolated me from anyone who might have helped me see the truth." I glanced at Alohan in the audience, her nod giving me strength. Sigrid's eyes filled with tears, but they felt rehearsed, like a performance for the judge. Torrance stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. Bennett tried to dismiss our case, claiming it was a family misunderstanding, but his words rang hollow against our evidence. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "This isn't just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "This pattern of behavior, forgery, theft, manipulation, demands investigation." She denied their motion to dismiss, ordering a full trial. My heart pounded, a mix of relief and fear. I'd spoken my truth, and it had been heard, but the fight was far from over. Sigrid's sobs grew louder, drawing glances from the courtroom, but I couldn't look at her. Her tears felt like another manipulation, a way to shift the blame. Torrance's silence was heavier, a refusal to acknowledge the pain he'd caused. As we left the courtroom, Eloan's hand found mine. "You did it, Wren," she whispered. "You stood up for yourself." I nodded, but the weight of the moment lingered. I'd exposed my parents' lies, but at what cost? The family I'd known was crumbling, and I wasn't sure what would take its place. Yet, in that courtroom, I'd found something new, a voice I didn't know I had, a strength I'd been forced to earn. This was only the beginning, and I was ready to see it through, no matter how hard the road ahead. Before the trial date was set, Torrance called, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk, Wren," he said. "Just us, no lawyers." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him and Sigrid at a coffee shop near our old neighborhood. I arrived early, clutching a cup of black coffee, its bitterness matching the knot in my stomach. The shop was quiet, the hum of the espresso machine a faint backdrop to my racing thoughts. When they walked in, I barely recognized them. Sigrid's eyes were red, her pearl necklace gone, replaced by a plain sweater. Torrance's usual charm was absent, his face lined with something I couldn't read. Anger, shame, maybe both. They sat across from me, the table a chasm between us. "You're tearing this family apart," Torrance said, his voice tight, like he was holding back a storm. "Do you know what this lawsuit is doing to us?" Sigrid nodded, her hands twisting a napkin. "We love you, Wren," she said, her voice breaking. "We used that money to keep the family afloat. You don't understand how hard it's been." I stared at them, my coffee growing cold. Their words were familiar, the same excuses I'd heard my whole life. Family sacrifices, tight budgets. But now I saw them for what they were, lies to justify stealing $96,000. I thought of the forged signature, the bank statements Eloan had shown me, the years I'd spent feeling guilty for needing a new pair of shoes. "You kept me in the dark," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You made me feel like I was the problem, while you spent my future." Sigrid's tears came faster, but they didn't move me. I remembered her hugs when I was little, warm but fleeting, always followed by a reminder of how much I cost them. Torrance leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You're being selfish," he said. "You think you're the only one who's suffered?" I wanted to scream, to tell him about the nights I'd gone hungry, the doctor visits I'd skipped, the shame I'd carried for being a burden. But I stayed calm, Eloan's strength echoing in me. "You stole from me," I said. "Not just money, but my trust, my family." They had no answer. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of a spoon nearby. I thought of Isolde, pushed out for speaking up, of Thane, told I didn't want him around. They'd isolated me to protect their lies, but I wasn't alone anymore. Outside the coffee shop, the world kept moving, cars passing, people laughing, but inside, time stood still. Sigrid reached for my hand, but I pulled back. The memory of her, we'll see, promises too raw. "We can fix this," she whispered, but I shook my head. Their chance to fix it had passed years ago, with every dollar they took, every lie they told. As I left, I saw reporters outside the courthouse from a distance, their cameras flashing like vultures circling. Eloan had warned me they'd come, drawn to the story of a daughter suing her parents. She met me outside, her arm a shield against their questions. "You spoke the truth," she said, her voice firm. I nodded, feeling lighter but not free. The coffee shop encounter had shown me their desperation, their refusal to own their betrayal. But it also showed me my own strength. I wasn't just fighting for $96,000. I was fighting for the life they tried to take from me. With Aloan by my side, I walked away, ready for the trial, ready to reclaim what was mine. The courtroom battle left me raw, but the first restitution funds from my parents' fraud gave me a chance to start over. I found a tiny apartment above a bookstore in Atlanta. Its creaky wooden floors and slanted ceilings a far cry from the house where I'd grown up under Sigrid and Torren's lies. For the first time, every choice was mine. No guilt, no apologies. I picked out a second-hand couch, its faded blue fabric soft under my hands, and hung a set of thrift store curtains, their deep indigo catching the morning light. Each small decision felt like a rebellion against the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit my parents' narrative. I'd always believed our family was struggling, that my needs were a burden, but now I knew the truth. They'd stolen $96,000 meant for my future, leaving me to scrape by while they lived comfortably. Moving into that apartment was like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. I arranged my books on a wobbly shelf, their spines worn from late-night study sessions, and placed a single potted plant by the window, a small promise to myself to grow, to thrive. Aloan visited one afternoon, her steps slow but steady as she climbed the narrow stairs. She carried a worn recipe book, its pages yellowed and smelling of old paper. "This was your great-grandmother's," she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "It's yours now." I opened it, tracing handwritten notes for peach cobbler and cornbread, recipes passed down through generations I'd been kept from by my parents' isolation tactics. Tears stung my eyes, not from pain but from a connection I'd been denied. Aloan's gift wasn't just a book, it was a tether to a family I was only beginning to understand. I thought of the nights I'd spent in my childhood bedroom, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars, believing Sigrid's sighs about tight budgets. Those lies had kept me small, but this apartment, this space, was mine. I cooked my first meal there, following Aloan's recipe for cornbread, the smell filling the room with warmth. It was imperfect, a little burnt at the edges, but it was mine. I sat on my couch, the recipe book open beside me, and felt something new, freedom. Not just from my parents, but from the guilt they'd woven into my life. Aloan sat across from me, her smile quiet but proud. "You're building something real," she said. I nodded, my throat tight. This wasn't just a home, it was a declaration. I was no longer the girl who apologized for existing. With every choice I made in that apartment, I was reclaiming the future my parents tried to steal, one small, deliberate step at a time. Healing from my parents' betrayal wasn't just about a new address. It was about unraveling the lies they'd planted in me. I started working with Amory Fletcher, a social worker who'd survived her own family's financial abuse. In her small office, with its mismatched chairs and soft lighting, I began to see how Sigrid and Torren had shaped my sense of worth. "They made your needs feel like burdens," Amory said during our first session, her voice gentle but unflinching. "That wasn't love, it was control." Her words hit hard, peeling back years of guilt. I'd spent my life believing I was too much, too needy, too costly, because of their size and lectures about family sacrifices. Now, I saw it for what it was, manipulation to hide their theft of $96,000. Amory helped me name the pain, to trace the scars left by skipped doctor visits, frayed clothes, and the constant shame of asking for anything. Therapy wasn't easy. It was like digging through the rubble of my past. But each session gave me tools to rebuild. I started journaling, writing down memories of Sigrid's we'll see promises and Torren's cold silences, seeing them not as my failures but as their choices. That clarity fueled something bigger. I founded the Aloan Trust for New Beginnings, a scholarship for students like me whose families used money as a weapon. The first application I read was from a girl who worked 2 jobs to escape her parents' control, and I cried, seeing myself in her words. I wanted to give her what I'd been denied, a chance to thrive without guilt. Then came Inheriting Silence, my podcast, where I shared my story and invited other survivors to speak. Each episode was a step toward breaking the silence my parents had enforced, not just on me, but on Isolde, Thane, and others they'd pushed away. Recording those episodes, I felt my voice grow stronger, no longer trembling like it had in the courtroom. I talked about the red flags, forged accounts, isolation, guilt trips, and how to spot them. Listeners wrote in, sharing their own stories of family betrayal, and I realized I wasn't alone. Amory's guidance kept me grounded as the podcast grew, helping me process the flood of emotions that came with each new story. I thought of Aloan, her steady hand during the legal battle, and how she taught me that real family builds you up, not tears you down. The Aloan Trust funded its first scholarship, and Inheriting Silence hit 1,000 downloads. Those numbers weren't just metrics, they were lives touched. Silence is broken. I was no longer just Ren, the girl who'd been betrayed. I was Ren, the advocate, using my pain to light a path for others, proving that healing wasn't just possible, it was powerful. The Aloan Trust and Inheriting Silence opened doors I never expected. At a Quiet Funds meeting, a support group for financial abuse survivors, I met people whose stories echoed mine. One woman, her voice shaking, approached me after a session. "Your podcast gave me the courage to leave," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I opened my own bank account last week." I nodded, my throat tight, her words sinking deep. Later, alone in my apartment, I broke down, clutching Aloan's recipe book. The weight of her story, of all their stories, hit me. Had I lost my family forever? Sigrid and Torin's faces flashed in my mind, their coffee shop pleas, their refusal to own their betrayal. But the recipe book, its pages worn from generations of hands, reminded me of what I'd gained. Aloan was my family now, her love rooted in truth, not control. At another Quiet Funds meeting, a young man shared how my podcast helped him confront his parents about a stolen inheritance. His story wasn't just his, it was mine rewritten with hope. I saw the ripple effect of my work, how speaking my truth gave others permission to speak theirs. I thought of the nights I'd felt worthless, believing I was a burden for needing a new backpack or a doctor's visit. Those moments had built me, not broken me. Quiet Funds became a lifeline, a place where I wasn't defined by my parents' lies, but by the strength I'd found. Aloan's recipe book sat on my shelf, a symbol of a new family, one I was building through advocacy, through connection. I cried that night, not from loss, but from purpose. My pain had become a bridge, linking me to others who'd been silenced. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. With every Quiet Funds meeting, every podcast episode, I was crafting a legacy, not of betrayal, but of resilience, of a family forged in truth. My story didn't end in the courtroom or my new apartment. It grew, reaching corners I never imagined. A local Atlanta paper ran a headline, "Graduate Uncovers Family Fraud." Suddenly, my inbox was flooded with messages from strangers who saw themselves in my pain. People I'd never met were sharing their own stories of betrayal, parents who controlled them with money, families who silenced them with guilt. Each email was a thread, weaving a tapestry of shared resilience. I started speaking out, first at a small university event, standing on a stage that felt too big for my trembling voice. I shared the red flags of financial abuse, forged accounts, isolation, the guilt trips that made you feel like a burden. The audience nodded, some wiping tears, and I realized my story wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. That talk led to an invitation to a national conference on family dynamics, where I stood before hundreds, my heart pounding but my words steady. I spoke of the $96,000 my parents stole, the forged signature, the years I believed I was the problem. I shared Aloan's strength, how her truth set me free. The applause was warm, but the real impact came later, in a letter from a 16-year-old named Leora. "Your story helped me open a secret bank account," she wrote. "I'm applying to college without my parents knowing." Her words stopped me cold, tears blurring the page. Leora was me a decade ago, trapped, but fighting for her future. My podcast, Inheriting Silence, became a beacon for people like her, each episode a step toward breaking the silence my parents had enforced. Listeners sent reviews, calling it a lifeline, a voice for the voiceless. I thought of Aloan, her steady nod in the courtroom, and knew this was her legacy too. Speaking out wasn't just healing, it was power. I was no longer just Ren, the girl betrayed by her parents. I was Ren, the advocate, turning my pain into a megaphone for others, proving that the truth could set us all free. The reach of my story kept growing, like ripples on a lake I couldn't see the edges of. At a Quiet Funds chapter in Ohio, I sat in a circle of survivors, their faces a mix of pain and hope. A woman shared how my podcast helped her confront her brother about a stolen inheritance, her voice steady for the first time in years. A father, his hands clasped tightly, spoke up. "I control my daughter with money," he said, his voice low. "Your podcast made me see the hurt I caused." I apologized to her last week. His words hit me like a wave, heavy but hopeful. My pain wasn't just mine, it was changing lives, rewriting stories. I thought of the nights I'd felt worthless, apologizing for needing a new backpack or a doctor's visit, believing Sigrid and Torrens' lies about our struggling family. Those moments had built me, not broken me, and now they were building others. In Ohio, I saw survivors sharing my story, passing around my podcast like a torch. One young woman, barely 20, said, "I thought I was alone until I heard you." Her words echoed Leora's, and I realized I was part of something bigger, a movement to break the silence of financial abuse. Back in Atlanta, I opened an email from a teacher who'd played my podcast in her classroom. "My students are talking about boundaries now," she wrote. "They're asking questions about family and money." I sat back, stunned, picturing kids like I'd been, learning to question the guilt trips before they took root. The Aloan Trust grew too, funding scholarships for students escaping controlling families. Each application was a story of resilience, a reminder of why I kept going. I thought of Aloan's recipe book, its worn pages a symbol of the family I'd lost and the one I was building. At a Quiet Funds meeting, a man thanked me for helping him see his parents' manipulation, his eyes bright with newfound clarity. I cried later, alone, not from loss but from purpose. My parents had stolen $96,000, my trust, my sense of belonging, but they couldn't take my voice. Every talk, every episode, every survivor's story was proof of that. I wasn't just Ren anymore. I was part of a community, a legacy of truth. Eloan's words rang in my mind. Real love builds, not breaks. I was building now, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been silenced. My story, once a wound, had become a bridge, connecting me to others, showing them they weren't alone. This was my legacy, not the pain of betrayal, but the power of speaking out, of turning scars into strength. Looking back, that graduation dinner was a fracture, splitting my life into before and after. My parents' betrayal, stealing $96,000 meant for my future, shattered the family I thought I knew. But from that pain, I found my voice. Eloan's courage, her unwavering truth, showed me that real love builds, not breaks. Every step, from uncovering the forged account to standing in the courtroom, was a fight to reclaim my worth. The Aloan Trust and inheriting silence became my way to turn scars into strength, helping others break free from financial abuse. I think of Leora, the 16-year-old who opened a secret bank account, and the survivors at Quiet Funds who found their voices through my story. My pain became their power, just as Aloan's love became mine. If you've ever felt like a burden for needing what's yours, know this: you're not alone. Speak your truth. Visit the Aloan Trust website to share your story or find resources to take back your future. Your voice matters, and it can change everything. Don't let silence win. Stand up, like I did, and build something unbreakable. The journey didn't end with the trial or my new apartment. It's still unfolding. There's more to the story. Secrets I uncovered in my parents' emails, a letter from Sigrid that shook me, and a choice I had to make about forgiveness. Could I ever see them as family again after all they'd done? That's coming in our next episode, where I dive into what happened after the courtroom, the unexpected allies I found, and the question of whether healing means letting go. You won't want to miss it. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this fight for truth. I'm Ren, and this is Inheriting Silence, my podcast where we break the silence together. Thank you for listening, for sharing your stories, for being part of this community. Eloan taught me that family isn't just blood, it's the people who lift you up. You're my family now, and together, we're rewriting our stories. Until next time, keep speaking, keep fighting, and know that your truth is enough. This is Ren, signing off, with hope for new beginnings.